Hi guys, welcome to the CARD 2021 conference. My name is Matthew Schmidt, and today I'm going to be talking about a virtual reality intervention that we've been working on since about 2016, and the title of the talk today is Designing Virtuoso, a virtual reality intervention for individuals with autism. As I mentioned before, my name is Matthew Schmidt. I'm an associate professor at the University of Florida, and I also direct the Advanced Learning Technologies studio there. My wife, Carla Schmidt, is also on this talk. She won't be participating in giving the talk today, but she was absolutely instrumental in contributing to the work that we did at the time. She was the director of the Impact Innovation Program, where many of the participants who engaged in this virtual reality intervention were involved. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So our agenda is going to talk a little bit about autism and virtual reality. Then I'll tell you about our intervention, which was Virtuoso, a virtual reality intervention for individuals who were in the Impact Innovation Program. Then I'll talk about the design-based research that we engaged in to develop Virtuoso. I'll talk a little bit about the findings that we had from a single phase of our research, our initial pilot, and then I'll talk a little bit about implications and what we're working on now. So why don't we jump in? Now, I've given this talk before, and typically when I talk to educational technology audiences, I have to give a lot of background on autism. I don't think I have to do that at the CARD conference, and so I'm just going to jump through the next couple of slides. On this slide, I typically talk about the diagnostic profile of autism as defined in the DSM-5. I presume that many of the audience members are already aware of that. I also am certain that many of you are aware of the increasing prevalence of autism. This slide is just a representation of that since 2004, and as we can see, as of 2018, the latest estimate was 1 in 59 children in the U.S., and that's essentially the same in other countries as well, such as the UK. We know that it manifests more in boys than in girls, with 1 in 37 of males having autism, 1 in 151 girls having autism. And we know that this neurodevelopmental disorder often manifests comorbidly with other challenges such as ADHD, epilepsy, a variety of sensory challenges, and so on. People with autism need supports that can range from just needing some supports to needing very substantial supports. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this continuum. Other people might refer to this as low functioning versus high functioning. We prefer to avoid that language specifically and to focus on the supports required. But ultimately, what it comes down to is autism can cause some real challenges in terms of quality of life. And examples of that would be people with autism are chronically underemployed or unemployed. They have challenges in terms of their ability to live independently. And if this is left completely untreated, if there are no therapeutic or educational interventions used, then quality of life is really going to suffer, and people become very socially isolated. And you know, I talked about educational and therapeutic interventions. Well, many educational and therapeutic interventions nowadays are provided through computers, information and communications technologies. So these computer-based interventions have been used very widely to provide support and therapeutic interventions, and a very substantial basis of evidence is kind of grown around the use of these digital technologies. And there's a lot of reasons why we would want to use technologies to deliver interventions. The interventions are going to have a high degree of fidelity of implementation, and that's largely because computers are able to provide the same kinds of instructions and feedback every single time. They're very, very predictable. And people with autism tend to like predictability. And this is one of the reasons that people with autism tend to be drawn towards computers. One area of information and communications technologies that's shown particular promise for people with autism is virtual reality. Virtual reality is widely considered to have particular promise for people with autism. Its educational value has been largely acknowledged, and there's been a growing evidence base in terms of research for the last 20 years. So back in 1996, Dorothy Strickland and her colleagues did kind of the seminal piece of research that kickstarted this research area. She had 2 children with autism try on this old school, bulky 12-pound headset that cost an incredible amount of money, far more than headsets nowadays cost. And she found that the children were just incredibly engrossed and engaged, and hypothesized that this technology could potentially be used with individuals with autism to great effect. So on that basis, a research field was born, and many people have been investigating the use of virtual reality for people with autism since that time. However, because headsets were so bulky and so expensive at the time, and the computers that were required to use them were also quite expensive, the types of research that have been performed since then have tended to focus only on desktop-based virtual reality. By desktop-based virtual reality, I mean not the kind where you have a headset on, but instead the type of virtual reality that can be experienced using a computer monitor, such as what you're probably looking at right now, given that this is a virtual conference. So examples of that would be Second Life, which was a virtual world that you can use an avatar to interact with other avatars in ways that are somewhat socially similar to ways things happen in the real world. A variety of free tools have also been investigated, such as the Open Simulator or Sun Microsystems' Open Wonderland project, which is now defunct. But about 5 years ago, things started to really heat up in the virtual reality space because the Oculus Rift became available, and the Oculus Rift was the first consumer-grade virtual reality headset that was affordable and really good. And since then, the virtual reality headsets have just kind of continued to improve, and very rapidly, in fact. And the costs are also going down. And that means that researchers who were not able to get their hands on this type of kit before were now able to access it, and were able to investigate it. And that's essentially what's happened with this project. So let's talk a little bit about that. Here's a screenshot from our simulation, Virtuoso. And I'm not going to jump into talking about Virtuoso just yet. I want to provide just this as a backdrop because I want to talk about the special abilities that virtual reality makes possible. These are what we call in educational technology, we call these affordances. And virtual reality has many useful affordances for people with autism. It's very customizable, for instance. Researchers can maintain a very high level of experimental control. We can control basically everything that happens in the virtual world. And we're also able to deliver very highly realistic contexts in which skills can be practiced safely and without danger. There are other potential benefits in that because virtual reality is computer-based, it's often highly predictable. We're able to provide a very high degree of structure. We can customize how complex a task is. We can make it simple, complex. We can add additional variables into it. We're able to, again, control the virtual environment. We can make it more realistic. We can make it less realistic. There are ways that we can manipulate the degree to which people feel immersed or present in the virtual world. We can automate feedback. I mean, it goes on and on. We can automate assessment. We can build in reinforcers. It's a very powerful medium for research. And we're hoping that with the work that we're doing, this will then translate into a very powerful medium for practitioners and for people who are on the autism spectrum. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. A central premise that underscores much of the research that's been done so far related to VR and autism is called the Assumption of Verticality. Now, what is veridicality? In the term, we can see verid or veritas or truth. That truth kind of translates into realism. How realistic or authentic does the virtual world seem to a participant? And this is central because if the virtual world is perceived to be authentic and realistic, much like the real world, then people will behave in the virtual world in ways that are similar to how they would behave in the real world. And this enables generalization from the virtual world to the real world. Generalization is really important because we know that's kind of a very pervasive challenge in autism research. Getting intervention outcomes or intervention effects to transfer from one context to another, that's a real sticky problem. So virtual reality is seen as one potential way that we might be able to approach the problem of generalization. And some of our work is focused on that as well. Let me show you a couple of examples of virtual reality interventions that have been developed over the years. On the left-hand side, we have the virtual reality social cognition training. And in this particular simulation, this is focused on social skills, and children are trying to make friends in a cafeteria. On the right-hand side, we have the AVIS project, and here the child, in this particular simulation, the child is tasked with finding a seat on the bus in a socially appropriate manner. And this has the AVIS project has a variety of other K through 12 based simulations, school-based simulations. Those are just a couple of pieces of research that have been done. There have been many, many more. But let's talk a little bit about the state of the research. So this graphic that I have here on the screen here is meant to illustrate a gap, because there has been 20 years of research, more than 20 years of research now in this area, but the research has been largely piecemeal and preliminary. There are a lot of limitations to the research with small sample sizes, no comparison groups, very low effect sizes. The empirical evidence is just very limited. In addition to that, we don't know much about how virtual reality might work for adults, and that's because most of the research has been done on children and adolescents. Also, the majority of research is focused on people who are in need of some support, but not on those who are in need of very substantial supports. In other words, what some might refer to as higher functioning. And another problematic area is that although the assumption of veridicality would suggest that skills that are learned and practiced in virtual reality might transfer to the virtual world, there is very limited evidence to actually show that transfer or generalization happening. So we have some problems. Virtual reality has largely been done on desktop displays, so we don't really know how people with autism are going to experience headset-based virtual reality. This is changing now, but at the time that we started the project, it was pretty novel. In addition, most of what we know about the people who have used virtual reality is based on studies that have been done with children and adolescents, but there's very little known about how adults might benefit from this technology. In addition, a lot of the work has been done with people who are not in need of substantial or very substantial supports. So how can we use virtual reality to support populations who might need additional supports or more supports? And finally, how can we promote generalization from the virtual environment given this assumption of veridicality? How can we promote that generalization from the VR environment to the real world? So it was in light of these challenges that we developed the Virtuoso project. And we're going to talk about that a little bit now. At the core of Virtuoso is this idea of adaptive skills. These are practical, everyday skills that are needed to function and meet the demands of one's environment. These can be skills that are necessary to effectively and independently take care of yourself and to interact with other people. So, for example, this might be taking a shower or brushing your teeth or riding a bus or crossing the street, going shopping, preparing a meal. All of these are adaptive skills. However, for people with autism, oftentimes adaptive skills need to be taught explicitly. And it's from this perspective that we developed Virtuoso. We focused specifically on the issue of public transportation. And not just any public transportation, but we focused on using a university shuttle. Now, public transportation is largely cited as one of the greatest barriers to community inclusion and independent living for all individuals with disabilities. And one of the challenges with the Impact Innovation program that we worked with, this was an adult day program for individuals on the spectrum. They required use of the university shuttle, but they did not have any training at the time on how to use the shuttle. They were only using kind of an ad hoc training approach where a staff member would go and get on the shuttle with a particular participant and kind of train them on how the shuttle worked. So Virtuoso was an opportunity to standardize and formalize a training regimen for using the university shuttle, and it also provided an opportunity for us to create a virtual environment where this training could be done in a safe and completely controllable manner. So we didn't have to worry about people going out in the street, for example, or running into problems at the bus stop with, bullying or what have you, or missing the bus or having a meltdown, right? We were able to do the training initially in the virtual environment, and then hopefully be able to transfer that to the real world. And what does that look like? Well, that looks a lot like what you see on the screen right now. This is one of the university shuttle buses that was used at the University of Cincinnati for people, for all students, but people who were engaged in the Impact Innovation program. One aspect of this adult day program was vocational training, and individuals who were enrolled in Impact Innovation would use the university shuttle system to get to their job training, essentially. And there were some other benefits to learning to use the shuttle as well. For example, participants understood that if they were to get lost on campus or run into any sorts of problems, that they would be able to get onto the shuttle, and no matter where they were, at some point the shuttle would return them to a familiar stop where they were able to disembark and then make their way back to the Impact Innovation offices. So there was a real practical value to learning to use the shuttle system. However, it was quite a challenge to make this training work in virtual reality, particularly for the population that we were working with. And one of the ways that we did that was by creating a conceptual model of how we could scaffold the learning process. Ultimately, this broke down into two phases. The first phase was acquisition of a skill, and the second phase focused on transferring that skill. So on the diagram that you see on the screen, on the left-hand side, we have the skill acquisition phase here, and all of the skill acquisition pieces then kind of cascade from that to the right, and the same about skill transfer. The skill acquisition phase started by providing an initial task orientation, and the pedagogical strategy that we used was social narrative, which other people might refer to as social stories. And this is a approach that has years and years and years of research behind it. What we did with this was we would present it to our participants on a tablet device. So essentially a slideshow that they were able to kind of tab through. Following this, and this is the first aspect of virtual reality that participants would experience, we would provide a video model of the task of getting onto the bus. And again, video modeling is another intervention approach that has a very rich literature base. This specifically used spherical video-based virtual reality. This type of virtual reality uses 360-degree videos and is presented to participants using a headset. Following this, and this is the next piece of the virtual reality aspect of our intervention, participants would rehearse the task of using the university shuttle using multi-user head-mounted display-based virtual reality. So we would have the instructor in one virtual reality headset, we would have the participant in another virtual reality headset, and they would work together to walk through the steps of using the shuttle system. And finally, and this is not what we're going to talk about in today's talk, participants would then actually do the task. They would go to the bus stop, they would use technology to see when the shuttle was going to arrive, and then they would get onto the shuttle. So that would be the transfer or generalization piece. Here we have a screenshot of the social narrative aspect of Virtuoso. So once again, this is something that participants would see on a tablet, and they would then just go forward and back, and it would be read to them using audio. Then the 360-degree videos, or the spherical video-based virtual reality, would be presented to participants using either a low-cost Google Cardboard coupled with a smartphone, or we also had a Google Daydream headset that we had developed an app for that participants could use to engage with these 360-degree videos. And here's a clip of what one of those 360-degree videos looks like.
Let's go find a seat. This seat looks pretty good. Let's sit here. Now, let's get out your iPad and check the shuttle map so we can figure out when the shuttle's coming. We're going to use the UC Shuttle app. All right, let's check our UC mobile app. The first thing we're going to do is open your iPad. Now we need to go to Safari and enter uc.doublemap.com and push go. That takes us to the UC mobile app. Now we're looking for the southwest route. Let's scroll down and see if we can find it. There it is, highlighted in pink. And as you can see, when we push the button, the map shows us the route highlighted in pink. So we are here, and the shuttle is here. The shuttle follows the pink line. The shuttle is going in this direction. As you can see, there are a number of stops before the shuttle arrives. Looks like we need to wait a while.
In the video you just watched, the online guide was performing the third step of this aspect of shuttle training, which was determining when the shuttle was going to arrive. In the next clip, you're going to see the shuttle arrive and the participant actually board. Let's check that out.
Hey, a bus is here. Let's go check it out.
That was my moment.
What bus are we riding today? We're riding the southwest route. What does it say on that bus? It says the southwest route. Should we get on this bus? Yes, we should.
So what we just saw there were the final 2 steps of that part of shuttle training. So the participant uses the app to determine when the shuttle is going to arrive at the shuttle stop, and then determines if that's the correct shuttle and gets on the shuttle finally. In the next segment, you're going to see the virtual rehearsal of that task. So the same 2 steps of the shuttle training, but here they're actually engaging in this in an immersive virtual training app. So let's check that out.
So when you get close, you know what to do with the green pods, right?
Uh huh.
You choose which one you want to stand on.
I'm on one.
Nice job. All right, so you've arrived at University Plaza. The next thing we need to do, if you remember from our schedule, is to check the University Shuttle app so we can know when our shuttle is going to arrive. After that, we'll wait for a little bit, and then finally we'll get on. So the UC mobile app lets you check when your shuttle will arrive. So can you look up at the iPad? Do you see the map?
Yes.
Do you see where the shuttle is on the map?
It's over by Straight Street.
Okay, cool. That's exactly where it is. Thanks for identifying that. Well, now that we know where it is, it looks like it's headed this way. So why don't we head to the end of the fountain and let's try to get on. It got here a little bit faster than we thought. So as it drives up, can you tell me what it says on the side so we know if it's our shuttle?
Southwest.
Is this our shuttle?
Yes.
Yes, it is. All right, let's wait for it to come to a complete stop, and then I want you to get on the shuttle by going.
Yeah, I'm on.
Oh, you're on. Oh, thank goodness.
Yes.
I was so worried. Yay,
Yes,
you made it.
I'm on.
Good job, Steve. Hey, can you turn around and walk towards the back of the bus? You earned an achievement, and I want you to read that for me if you can.
If I can find it. You go on the shuttle level 2.
Fantastic. You got on the shuttle. That's awesome. You did exactly what you needed to do. You followed all 4 steps. So you finished everything you needed to do for shuttle training today. And even though it was a little bit harder today, there were other people in the environment and other distractions, and you didn't have a red dotted line to tell you how to get there. You still did it all. No problem. Well, I'm so proud of you, Steve. You did great. So Noah's going to help you get your headset off, and thank you so much.
Okay.
See ya.
See ya.
And there you have it. It looks like our participant was able to get on the shuttle. So what you've seen there is in the first segment, you were able to see the skills acquisition as promoted by video modeling using the 360-degree video approach. And in the second part, you were able to see what the fully immersive VR experience looks like when participants were able to rehearse the skill in this engaging, immersive environment. Now I'd like to talk about 2 of the principles that guided our design. And the first was that we were designing specifically for transfer and generalization. To that end, we were applying some classic heuristics for generalization that were published by Stokes and Baer, as well as Stokes and Osnes, that focus on kind of the conditions that are needed to promote generalization from one context to another. One of the things you probably noticed was there was a great deal of similarity between the video modeling and then the actual rehearsal of the skill. And we're trying to train diversely. That's one of the heuristics that we are applying here, where we are applying the same steps and the same approaches in one context as we're going to apply in the next, and then we're going to apply that once again, transferring what was learned in the rehearsal VR environment into the real world. So that's one. And the next is designing for cognitive accessibility. So to that end, we applied universal design for learning principles in which our participants were able to engage in multiple ways. And we also applied a variety of evidence-based practices from the applied behavior analysis literature. And within that frame, we were using concrete representations you clearly saw that there's a direct connection between the virtual world and the real world. We are trying to make this as easy to use as possible and seamless as possible, and basing everything here on a task analysis of the real activity in the real world. So it was from within this frame that we performed a small-scale pilot and did a evaluation that focused on the ease of use of our overall approach and the technology, the user experience. So we were looking specifically at the experience of the participants as they engaged with these technologies tools, and we also wanted to see the extent to which our approach met the design goals of being easy to use and so on. We had 5 separate participants. We had Kevin, Evan, Travis, Andy, and Jermaine. These are all pseudonyms, of course, ranging in age from 23 to 34 years old. All of them were enrolled in the Impact Innovation program at the University of Cincinnati. And as you can see, all of the participants had a diagnosis of autism, and some of them had some comorbid issues as well. We did a number of 10 sessions. Each session was around 20 minutes over the course of 5 days. Each one of these sessions consisted of one session being the video-based virtual reality, and another session being the fully immersive virtual reality. In terms of ease of use, our participants rated the ease of use as above average. So we used the system usability scale, that's this SUS that you see up here in the top right. And the system usability scale, anything that scores above a 68 on this scale is considered to have above average usability. And as we can see, many participants scored the spherical video-based virtual reality and the virtual reality quite highly. But there was one participant in particular, participant 3, who scored the experience quite low. And we suspect that this was actually a problem with our instrument. And that's because our instrument was counterbalanced, where we had every even question worded positively and every odd question worded negatively. So you would expect to see strongly agree and strongly disagree or similar happening throughout, but instead this participant just selected all strongly agree. So we expect that this participant actually had a really good time, but we also want to present the results as we found them. So that kind of skewed our findings, as you can see, a little bit lower than what we think they would have been if there hadn't been a problem with our instrumentation. We fixed that in the interim. We also administered a single item user friendliness scale. This scale asks, on average, all things considered, how would you rate the user friendliness of this tool? And it varies from worst imaginable to best imaginable. And as you can see here, by and large, people rated it good or excellent, both the video-based and the virtual reality-based. Now let's talk a little bit about participants' user experience. Now, to assess the user experience, we used qualitative methods. We open-coded many of the videos that we recorded, and what we found was that overall we had a generally positive user experience where participants quickly learned how to use the system. They found it highly motivating. They communicated a desire to use the system again. In fact, one participant asked to come back and do the experience a second time. And this was after this participant had experienced some cyber sickness, which also we did find some evidence of cyber sickness, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. In terms of doing our deep dive into the system, there were a number of themes that we identified related to cognitive accessibility, participants' affect, which was generally positive, as well as some, I would say, initial evidence or preliminary evidence that suggests transfer could be happening in this environment. In addition, we took a look at the extent to which Virtuoso met our design goals. And in terms of the design goal of creating a feasible intervention approach, one thing we found was that Virtuoso really does take into account the unique aspects of autism in its design. The user interface was found to not be distracting. The experts who reviewed the system suggested that our design goal of promoting cognitive accessibility was evident in our interface, and the universal design for learning and evidence-based practices that we used were also evident in our design. In terms of the design goal of creating a relevant experience, many of our experts recommended that participants undergo repeat usage of the technology in order to prepare them for the real world task, which is something that we did in subsequent versions of the tool. We found that the visual fidelity was adequate, but it wasn't great. So we worked very hard in subsequent versions to improve the visuals associated with the system. And in terms of the degree to which participants felt immersed in the system, we found that we had done an adequate job with that, but that there was also room for improvement. And that's where we put a lot of our effort, again, in subsequent versions. I should point out that this research paints part of the picture, but it is also quite limited given that it's very preliminary, and we also had a very small sample. It was a unique context of an adult day program at a specific university, and our methods and processes were quite unique. So this is not something that you could simply pick up and apply somewhere else without doing some substantial retooling. So what are some of the findings that might be of use to other people from this? Well, one of the things that we found as we were playing with these different tools, such as the Google Cardboard and the Google Daydream, which produce lower levels of immersion, or they're less immersive, as well as the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift, which lead to greater levels of immersion. We found that the less immersive tools were far easier to use, and the more immersive tools were harder to use. So as immersion increases, it seems that ease of use decreases. So there's a real trade-off that needs to be found between those two. In addition, we found that as we worked to create an environment that was more realistic, we were spending more time, energy, and resources developing this intervention that frankly was prohibitive on any practical level. And this raises questions in our mind about the social validity of this approach. That is, if a practitioner were seeking to create a virtual reality intervention, a practitioner would not be able to spend the amount of time that we spent developing this intervention out and applying the resources to it that we have done. So there really does need to be further work at simplifying tools so that they're going to be approachable for practitioners, so that we can increase the validity, the social validity of our approach. We really want to get to the point where this stuff is so easy to use and so easy to develop that we could put it in the hands of a practitioner or even someone with autism and watch them take off and be successful with interventions that are developed for the technology. And then finally, I want to point out that we are very concerned about the evidence of cyber sickness that we encountered when we were running our pilot. So one thing that we know about virtual reality in general is that it does produce sensations of cybersickness. And this can be increased pulse, this could be sweating, but there can also be some adverse effects associated with this, such as dizziness and nausea. And we're concerned about that from an ethical perspective, because our ethical code really does clearly state that we as researchers have an increased responsibility and special responsibility to try to reduce any sort of negative effects of an intervention, particularly when we are working with vulnerable populations. And so this is an area where we are currently focusing pretty heavily in order to create methods and processes that are going to lead to less adverse effects when people are engaged in using these tools. That brings me to the end of my presentation for today. And I guess if I were in the audience, I would be wondering, well, did they ever answer the question about whether this works, whether this actually led to participants who engaged in the virtual reality experience being able to independently use the university shuttle? And the answer is no. But I also want to emphasize that that wasn't really our intent. Again, there are many problems with the research that kind of underscores the work that we are doing. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was go back to brass tacks and kind of do a soup to nuts approach, looking at some of the foundational issues and ensuring that we were being sensitive to those before we moved forward and attempted to make bold claims about how effective this intervention was with our participants. That, of course, leaves us with the question of, well, where do we go now? And one of the things that we've learned is this is really complex work. And where we go next is really dependent on our values about priorities. Do we value establishing effectiveness over creating an intervention that's going to be sensitive to our participants, that is not going to cause adverse effects, and that is going to provide support for some of the participants who are in need of the most substantial supports? So really going beyond the research to date is going to require that we approach these foundational issues in a way that's quite intentional and that really takes the perspectives of our participants and incorporates those into our own work. So coming out to the other end of this research experience that we've done, we've really begun to gravitate away from medical models of disabilities and embrace more social models and understand just how fundamentally important it is to include our participants not only in the evaluation of these interventions that we create, but also in the design of the interventions themselves. Moving forward, our work will be focusing on methods and processes to better include individuals with autism in the design of interventions and in the design of research studies that involve them. In addition to that, we'll be focusing specifically on methods and processes that we can apply to potentially reduce the likelihood of adverse effects manifesting when participants are using virtual reality. We think that these two approaches could potentially dovetail in that involving participants in the design of these environments and these research studies could lead to experiences that are better and that will result in fewer adverse effects, given that we've had people who we will be using this with involved from the very beginning. So it's on that note that I'm going to conclude the research talk for today, and we welcome any questions that you might have, either here in the live video or in the comments once this is posted on social media or some video sharing platform. Thank you.